Hallelujah. Are you excited to be here? Oh my goodness, today's a great day. Turn me down just a little bit again, if you will. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, I'm so glad to see you. How many of you believe in coincidence? I don't either. I don't believe in coincidence. I don't believe in accidents. I believe that it's divine appointment, and I'm convinced that every Shabbat is indeed a divine appointment. And as I was looking at this particular Torah portion for the last several weeks, I saw some things in this Torah portion that I would dare say will push you to the edge of your traditions. And we're probably going to explode some of the paradigms that have been formed over the years that you've been in the church. And then those of you that came out of the church and are in the Hebrew roots movement who, celebrate the Sabbath, I promise you, you're going to see some things in this Torah portion that more than likely will cause you to look at this particular parsha in a different way than you ever have before. How many of you like to be shaken out of your comfort zone? Oh my goodness. Well, we're living in a season where comfort as we've known it for the last 20 years or longer is no more. And as the days ensue, we're going to see the comfort zone become narrower and constricted until, in order for you to find a comfort zone, you're going to have to be intentional in your relationship with Him, and you're going to have to remain within the confines of the Goshen that Abba has given you. Because if you get outside the boundaries of the Goshen that Abba's given you, you will be in Egypt, and you will be plagued, for lack of a better term. Amen? This Torah portion, again, is one that I don't know how many years I've looked at it, but hundreds of times. And it begins in Exodus chapter 35, verse 1, and runs through chapter 38, verse 20. And the title of it is VaYachel. Say that with me. VaYachel. And there's so many mysteries that are hidden in these Torah portions. In my opinion, I put Psalm 25, verse 2 there, which talks about how it's the glory of Yah to conceal a matter, but it's the obligation of kings to search those things out. And if you're just satisfied, with the ordinary, and a lot of people are, because settling for ordinary means you don't really have to do much. And if you're content with ordinary, that's all you will ever achieve. That's all you ever have. That's all you will ever be. But Abba's looking for a group of individuals that are extraordinary, that are supernatural. That means you're willing to step out of your comfort zone and become those kingly sons who search out the hidden things of the Torah. And there are some riddles that are in this parsha that have to do with the revelation of the body of the Messiah, the dwelling place of the King. And if you're willing, we're going to go after those. We're going to pursue them this afternoon. But I want to issue you a word of caution. You need to be careful in admitting that you want to know the hidden things and that you want to search those out. Because if you do attempt to begin to search them out, it's going to change what your traditions have taught you. Are you willing to go there? Well, if you are, we'll begin by looking at the title, VaYachel. And it's actually a three-word phrase. And it would be translated in the King James English as He gathered or He assembled. And it emanates or derives from the root of the word Strong 6950, which is the word kahal. And it literally does mean to gather, to assemble, a convocation. And if you're familiar with Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, it says, and forsaking not the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is. And then looking forward into the future in that same verse, he says, talking about the day that's coming, forsaking not the assembling of yourselves together, and looking at the day that's coming, how much more should we be willing to consider assembling together? And if you look at this word kahal, the root of it emanates from what we would call the kuf vav lamed, and it's translated kol. And the first time you see this word kol is in Genesis chapter 3. It's the Hebrew word for voice. And in fact, if you look at chapter 3, verse 8, you see this word kol, this voice, is heard and literally seen walking in the Garden of Eden. And if we look at this kahal, this word to assemble, right in the middle of the kuf lamed root, the word for kol, is this Hebrew letter hey. And every Hebrew letter is a word picture. And if you look at the Hebrew letter hey, it actually embodies a picture of a man standing up, literally waving his arms like this, trying to get your attention, calling your attention to whatever's happening, saying, look, pay attention, behold. And it's actually reminding us, since it's inserted in this word regarding assembling, it's pay attention. And Abba's speaking to you and I, because by assembling the house of Israel, who are actually the living stones for the building of the tabernacle, what Moshe is actually saying is, he's speaking to the children of Israel here in the text, but this Torah portion was not written for the children of Israel. They did not read this Torah portion. This Torah portion was written for you and I. And so what Moshe is actually saying to you and I, as he was saying to those standing in front of them at that time, he says, come and behold, pay attention, look, regard this voice who is going to walk among us. And so what he's actually referring to is the intent of Yahweh. And I want you to pay close attention here, because it should bring up something that's familiar to us. But he's speaking regarding the intent of Yahweh to walk between the houses of Israel throughout their wilderness ordeal while dwelling in their midst. And he's doing this just as he did in chapter 15 of Genesis when he walks between the pieces. Remember when Abraham has the pieces laid out, the sacrifices, and Abraham falls into a deep sleep. Why? Abraham was not a fit man. He was not a sinless man, and so Abraham could not walk between the pieces. And so our Messiah, Yeshua, had to do that in his stead, as he does for us. And then you can go back and see in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8, this voice arrives in the garden after the fall for the express purpose. Adam and Eve have sinned. They are in need of a sacrifice. They cannot offer a sacrifice for themselves. And so this voice arrives to literally walk between the pieces. He becomes a symbolic offering of the sacrifice of Messiah. And you see the same thing happening here. He's making a covenant promise to the children of Israel. Even though you are not able to offer a sacrifice for yourself, and you know what happens. They go into the wilderness and they begin to offer the blood of the bulls and goats. He's telling them that I am going to walk between the pieces on your behalf until such time as the one arrives who is sinless and can offer himself. Does that make sense to you? Well, this promise that we're discussing here actually comes on the heels of what we know as the molten calf or the golden calf incident. And we know from looking at the last Torah portion that we were sharing with you, Terumah, that the sole purpose of Yahweh in gathering the children of Israel at Mount Sinai was to make the children of Israel the tabernacle. You are supposed to be the temple of the Most High. You were called as an individual, and we collectively to be the tabernacle of the Most High. But because of what happened with the golden calf incident, Yahweh then has to come up with what I like to refer to as the second choice, but he knew this ahead of time, so it's not really his second choice. What he does is he now has Israel to construct a wilderness tabernacle, a wilderness tent, instead of the people becoming collectively the wilderness tent. Does that make sense to you? And so what we're seeing here is, in my opinion, when he gathers them together, he makes what I believe is one of the most powerful statements that I have personally ever heard in the Scripture. And you see it in Genesis chapter 35, 1b. And after assembling the children of Israel, he gives them this mind-staggering statement. Listen to this. These are the words which Yahweh hath commanded. Think about that for a second. What I'm sharing with you this afternoon, these are the words that Yahweh has commanded. But then there's an oomph added to the end of it, an exclamation, that you should do them. These are the words that Elohim has commanded that you should do them. It's not a suggestion. You see that? This is a command. If you're able to hear the words of Yahweh, and then once you hear it, you become obedient, you are obligated then to do these words. And in other words, it has to become part of your lifestyle. It's not what you do, it's who you have become. You literally have become the words of the Creator. And so I want to focus on those words that I have in my notes here, highlighted bold for you. The word words, and then the word do. Both of those in the King James English. We're going to look at it in the Hebrew. You're familiar with it. The word for words is the word debar, which means words or speech. But then the next word, it comes from the Hebrew word asah, which means to fashion something, to literally to take it, to fashion it, to make it, to produce it, to prepare it. And as a frame of reference for you, this word asah is extremely important from the very beginning of your Torah in Genesis chapter 1 forward. In fact, there are two words in what I like to call the recreation account. Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 forward. Genesis chapter 1 says, in the beginning, Yahweh creates the heavens and the earth. If you go back and look in Jeremiah chapter 4, Yahweh never created anything unless it was in a perfect state. Am I right? And so in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, creation would have been in a perfect state. Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 says, and the earth was without form and void, tohu vabohu, and indicates that something transpired to cause a perfect creation, something in a perfect state, perfect order, to then become out of order and in chaos. And so there are two words that are used to describe the creation account. One of those is bara. And that word bara, in beginning, Yahweh bara, he created the heavens and the earth. It means to bring something into existence that had never existed before. And then the second word that's translated as made or to create in that Genesis chapter 1 is the word asah. And the word asah is translated as to fashion or to form, but to take what you're fashioning now from something that had already existed. In other words, he takes the Adam and he creates the Adam out of something, the Adamah, that had already existed. So in our specific case here, this word kol, the voice, pre-existed. In the beginning was the Word. And so the Word has pre-existed from eternity's beginning. And so from what we read in the Hebrew text, it seems here, and I just want to put this before you, it seems here that Israel is being commanded to take the word that's given to them by Yahweh, a word that had never existed before, and now he speaks it into existence. And so he's to take this word, and then they're being obligated to do something with the word. How many of you believe that when Abba gives you a word, you're required to do something with it? And so when he says this is the word of Yahweh, this is the word that he's commanded you that you should do it, then what is happening here is that it seems as if that there is a work of sorts that's required of Israel in the midst of their calling, right? Are y'all paying attention? I know there's some distractions going on, but if you miss this, you're going to miss something that's going to impact your life. He's gathered them together. The word akah means to assemble. He's gathered them together for a purpose. And the purpose is for them to understand that they're to take this word that he's given them, and they're to use that word to fashion and to form it into a tabernacle. We know that he's talking initially here about the wilderness tent, but he's given us the command because you and I are to take his word and to form and fashion this man into the living tabernacle. And if you read this within the context that you see framed here, without going outside the boundaries of Genesis chapter 35, you will not see what I'm about to show you. It seems as if while assembling the children of Israel together, he tells them, here's the words that you're commanded and you're supposed to do them. But then it goes immediately into verse 2, which says some things regarding the Sabbath day, and it details some prohibitions regarding work. And so it seems as if there's something going on here, because if I'm being called together in a corporate body, assembled together for an express purpose, and I'm being given commands, and I'm being told to do something with those commands, and then immediately I'm told, don't do this, don't do any work on the Sabbath, it seems as if there's a disconnect between the two. Does that make sense to you? Or was it just me that saw the flag waving? Let me read this for you. Exodus chapter 35, verse 2 and 3. This follows the assembling of together, telling them you've got work to do. And then he says, wait a minute, 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day there shall be unto you an holy day, a Shabbat of rest to Yahweh. Whosoever doth work therein shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. It seems to me as if I'm missing something here, because this verse 2 and 3 is parenthetically inserted in some discussions about the children of Israel being gathered together right in the middle of 14 chapters that deal with building the tabernacle. He said, no, you can't do any work. And so I thought, maybe we need to go back and understand this. If you will, there's an indisputable link between the construction of the tabernacle here and this creation account that we've been talking about. If you go back and look at the frame of reference regarding the two, go back and look at Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, and then look here in Exodus regarding the creation, if you will, of the tabernacle. They are both contextually related in the Hebrew language, and both reveal temple construction and creation language. What's happening here in chapter 35 is the same kind of language that was used in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. It's all about taking the word of Yahweh and saying, let there be, and taking the word of Yahweh and forming it and fashioning it into shape. Does that make sense to you? I have for your benefit several verses here. You can see the contrast between the two, and you can see how they are linked. Genesis 1:31. Elohim saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And Moshe saw all the work, and behold, they had done it. In other words, according to what Yahweh had told them, and Yahweh or Moshe blessed them. The heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. Thus all the work of the tabernacle was finished, and the people did according to all that Moshe commanded them. And there's several other verses here. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, chapter 40 of Exodus, verse 33. Genesis 2, verse 3, Exodus 39, verse 43. So there's some connections here regarding temple language, creation language, that are knitting these two parshas together. Does that make sense to you? Now, if you remember when we were talking to you a couple of weeks ago, during the portion that we looked at called Teruma, we saw that the wilderness tabernacle became the vehicle of choice after the calf incident. Remember that? And how the wilderness tabernacle was actually laid out in the form of a man. And the reason it was laid out in the form of a man was because the wilderness tabernacle was designed to represent the Adam in his fallen carnal condition. Now, some may take exception to that. But if you go back and study the wilderness tabernacle, it represents a man that had death working in him, because everything about the wilderness tabernacle had to do with the shedding of blood, death. All of the animals that were brought in, it represented death working in this tabernacle, and the need for a sinless offering of a man. The blood of the bulls and goats were supposed to suffice until a perfect sinless man would arrive on the scene. And so until this perfect sinless man arrived, the wilderness tabernacle was on display to remind us that we were in a carnal, temporary vessel. That's why I shared with you this before. That's why we celebrate Sukkot. Sukkot reminds us that at one time we dwelled in booths. We were nomadic. We're led to believe that that's the simple meaning. We were nomadic. We lived in temporary vessels, but that's not the true hidden meaning of Sukkot. Sukkot's to remind you, this is the temporary vessel I dwell in. And there's going to come a day when I will no longer dwell in a carnal, fleshly, dying vessel where death works in it. There's going to come a day when I will see the demonstration of the majesty of my King working in this body, and there will be a transformation. This will become an eternal living tabernacle. Does that make sense? And so if you go back and look at it, the creation account and the tabernacle language that we're discussing here both revealed Adam and Israel as the ambassador, the emissary of Yahweh. In fact, some specific words are used in Genesis chapter 1 to describe Adam. He says, I am going to create Adam in my image. Now you need to understand something. Adam was not supposed to be a second-rate shadow, if you will, cast on the ground. Like when I stand outside in the sunlight and I stand upright and I have an image cast on the ground and you can see the shadow, but you can't make out the fine points of my body. Adam was supposed to be created in the likeness of Yahweh, so that when you see Yahweh, you see Adam. Adam operates in the same fashion, looks like, acts like, conducts his affairs like Yahweh himself. And so if you follow the creation account, and then you follow the creation here of the tabernacle that you see in these 14 chapters in Exodus that deal with the construction of the tabernacle, you see that both of them are followed by the institution of this holy convocation called the Shabbat. And the Sabbath stands out glaringly obvious after the recreation account. In Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2 immediately starts off talking about the Sabbath. The Sabbath becomes the pinnacle of creation then. And then when you study the tabernacle in Exodus chapter 35, immediately you see talking about gathering the assembly together for the purpose of commanding, for hearing the commandments of Yahweh and doing them. He immediately goes into talking about the Sabbath. And so there's a direct relation between the two. And it tells you that both the tabernacle and Israel are supposed to be the dwelling place, and that we're supposed to be connected somehow. We are, the purpose of our convening or coming together in this holy convocation is supposed to be revealed somehow in this institution called the Sabbath. And I know we've quoted the commandments, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Everybody's familiar with that. But do we really understand the purpose of Sabbath? Because the Sabbath was created for man and not man for the Sabbath. And so we have to go back and look at how that likeness of the man, the first Adam and the tabernacle, and yet also Israel. I want you to remember Israel and the tabernacle are kind of intertwined together here. And so both Adam and Israel and the wilderness tabernacle were supposed to function as the dwelling place of Yahweh. And so if we are to function as the dwelling place, then it seems as if there's certain responsibilities and certain characteristics that would be central to our understanding who we are and what our purpose is. Why do we come together on the Sabbath? Well, we come together to worship God. If I asked you that, I probably would get several basic generic answers. Why do we celebrate the Sabbath? Well, the commandments tell us to. Well, let me just go back and reiterate the first instance of the Sabbath being instituted. Let's read first Genesis chapter 1, verses 27 through 29, and show you what Yahweh says as he creates the first tabernacle, which is Adam. Adam became the first dwelling place. Are you with me still? And Elohim said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. So something regarding the Shabbat should have to do with dominion. Let us have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. And so, based on that, Yahweh created man in his own image. And listen to this. He's emphasizing this more than one occasion. So when he emphasizes something, you need to pay attention. So Elohim created man in his own image. In the image, there it is again, Elohim created him. How did he create him? Male and female created he them. And Elohim blessed them, and he said unto them, listen to me, how many of you believe that you've been blessed by the Creator? Come on, I want to see your hands. You believe you've been blessed? Well, blessing comes with conditions, and blessing comes with orders. In other words, you've been brought to the mountain, you're assembled together, and these are the words that he has commanded that you should do them. And so it goes all the way back to the first time that he spoke regarding the creating of his dwelling place, and he said, be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. Are you listening to me? And then he tells you over what and over whom. And so for your benefit, I highlighted the 5 foregoing words: fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. And if you look at those, there's a progressive or a maturation type state that exists. You're fruitful. I have the ability to receive seed, and so I can become fruitful. And if I'm fruitful, then I multiply. And if I'm fruitful and multiplying, then I will replenish. Why would I replenish? Because there was something that was there that had been fruitful before that's now gone, and so I need to replenish it. And if I'm fruitful and multiply and replenishing, then I have an addition to that mandate, and that is subdue. And then subduing something goes even further, because I can't let my foot up off the neck of the enemy. I have to continue to exercise dominion. These are kingdom, creation, tabernacle, temple orders and instructions. This is temple vernacular. Does that make sense to you? And so it becomes apparent that the purpose of Elohim in creating both the man and the dwelling place, the tabernacle, here in Exodus 35, in his image, would somehow be demonstrated in their ability to become fruitful, multiply, subdue, exercise dominion in his stead. And so the purpose of Adam being created initially was to make sure that the kingdom operated the way that he wanted it to, that Yahweh himself wanted it to. Then you fast forward to Israel. Israel was supposed to be the tabernacle of Yahweh. The golden calf incident takes place, and so they have to settle, if you will, and be satisfied with a temporary vessel called the wilderness tent. Nonetheless, that wilderness tent should have enabled the children of Israel to be fruitful and multiply, to replenish, to subdue, and have dominion over all of the enemies of creation while they were in the wilderness. Does that make sense to you? But in each case, after giving those mandates to Adam, be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion, and then talking about creating the tabernacle and telling them, this is the words that I'm giving you, you should do them, echoed here. Immediately on the heels of that, you have the institution of the Shabbat that follows each. If Yahweh tells me to take care of kingdom business and then tells me don't do anything, there's a contradiction. Am I missing this, or is it just me? So I need to find out exactly what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not supposed to do. Maybe my traditions have been wrong. Don't you start that car and travel on the Shabbat, because it's an internal, I almost said eternal, internal combustion engine. And when you turn it, there's a spark and you've created a fire. Come on now. And so, for the sake of argument, let's consider the need for the above. Based on the creation account, it becomes, in my opinion, easily understandable that creation had experienced a rebellion that changed the natural order. Genesis 1, everything's created in a perfect condition. Genesis 1, verse 2, things are in a chaotic state. Something happened, and you go back and read Isaiah 14, you can go back and read Ezekiel 28, you can find out what we refer to as the Luciferic rebellion. Something had changed the natural order of Yahweh's perfect creation. And you find that those original offenders have been cast down and they were subjugated. And the subsequent recreation, Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 and forward, are going to be restored to proper order and highlighted. The pinnacle of the recreation is when Yahweh creates man in his image, and then listen to this is mind-staggering. While bestowing upon them the title of his image, he is also endowing them with the ability to reproduce and to subjugate any entity that would be involved in a future rebellion that would come and challenge the recreation order. Does that make sense? Come on, if you're having trouble with it, let me know, and I'll back up and hit it again. So what he does is he's letting us know there was a rebellious event that took place and upset the natural order of things. Yahweh recreates the earth in a perfect condition. All the first 6 days, he said, it was good. He creates man, tells man, listen, creation has a propensity towards rebellion. I'm creating you in my image. I'm putting you here in this place. You're my ambassador. You're to become fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion to make sure that rebellion doesn't occur again. The children of Israel, they're brought out of the wilderness. They're brought to Mount Sinai. And Yahweh tells them, listen, chaos rules. I'm bringing you into a place. I'm going to take you into the land of Canaan where, guess what? The giants, the fallen ones, were occupying it. And so there's rebellion and chaos in front of them. I'm bringing you there. It's supposed to be just an 11-day journey from Egypt to the promised land. And he's preparing them to go in and to subjugate the enemies that would upset the natural order that he had planned for the earth. We could have entered into a millennial kingdom type existence at that time if Israel had not missed their call. Does that make sense to you? This ought to excite you. And so if you go back and look at this from the beginning, you can conclude that the recreation days is what I refer to as days 1 through day 6. It seems as if Yahweh knows in advance that creation is going to descend once again into chaos and disorder. Am I right? See, nothing caught him by surprise. And so we have explained to us the creation of man. And Genesis chapter 2, it begins with Yahweh taking the man and telling him, listen, creation is going to probably descend into rebellion again, and I'm going to place you in the garden for your purpose to make sure that it doesn't happen. We know that story. Adam falls. Fast forward. We're all the way here now into Exodus 35. He's bringing Israel out of Egypt. He's telling them, listen, I'm placing you in my Gan Eden. I'm placing you, and I believe that he brought them to Mount Sinai, and Mount Sinai would have literally been the location of the original Garden of Eden. And he brought them there to become fruitful and multiply. If they had fulfilled the obligations, if they had heard the words of Yahweh and done them, they would have transformed that wilderness place into a fruitful place called Eden, and they would have went back to Eden instead of us waiting 4,000 or 6,000 years later to do that. Adam's put in the garden, told to dress it and to keep it. And the purpose of that is so that he can make sure there was no future rebellion. We know that he fell. But Adam was given certain commands. Those commands, goes with the blessing, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish. Those tools were there to allow him to carry out the instructions of Yahweh regarding the exercise of his dominions. In effect, Adam was told, here are the commands of Yahweh that you should do them. Does that make sense to you? Fast forward, Exodus chapter 35. Moshe gathers the children of Israel. Literally what Moshe is doing, Moshe is almost the same as taking the man and forming him once again in the place of Yahweh. He's forming Israel just like Yahweh would have in the garden. And Israel collectively are being allowed to stand in the place of Yahweh. They're being allowed to bring the tabernacle man together and form that tabernacle man like Adam was formed. And they're being told, these are the words of Yahweh, do them. Why do I need to do the words of Yahweh? To make sure that we don't have any more rebellion and chaos that would upset the order that Yahweh has in the earth. How many of you are exercising the words of Yahweh? Come on. Fast forward to our portion. As we've shown earlier, Moshe kahals, he summons, he convokes the assembling of Israel together in order to Shema, to hear the same Edenic tabernacle commands given to Adam, namely, expressly, to hear the words and do them, or you could say it this way, to dress it and to keep it. And then if you follow the pattern here in Exodus 35, once more, you see that there's the Sabbath work prohibitions, and it's almost as if there's a contradiction. Wait a minute, you hear the words of Yahweh and you're told to do them, and then you're told don't do any work. And there's just 2 verses, verse 2 and 3, that has to do with work prohibitions, and then it goes into further detail, and it almost seems as if it's just kind of idly thrust in there. And I've got news for you. If you don't see these kinds of things, and when you see them, go back and look and see if it fits the context, then you've done yourself a disjustice, and you'll be suffering at the hands of traditions down through the years, and you will find yourself on the Shabbat in a constricted place where you cannot really truly enjoy the Sabbath the way that Yahweh designed it, and you will not be able to be a kingdom image man who administers the rules and the government of the kingdom if you don't understand the proper kind of restrictions. Are you listening to me? Is it possible that we may have been sold a bill of goods regarding strictly limiting Shabbat work? And maybe there was an intent there to redirect us. And if you don't think so, let me remind you of what happened to our Messiah. Yeshua was sorely attacked and castigated. In fact, the reason that they had a public, quote-unquote, legal, not lawful, legal reason to execute him was because of what he did on the Shabbat. Are you listening to me? Let me just make this declaration. I made this declaration close to 20 years ago. In the days in front of you, it's going to become illegal again for you to celebrate the Sabbath, especially if you heed the commands of Yahweh and do them on the Shabbat. Now let me remind you, context is everything. And for us to understand what Moshe is saying here in VaYachel regarding the assembling, now that word assemble can mean to gather, to put something together, and it's talking specifically about Israel and the Shabbat, then we need to go back and look at both of these from the place that they're first used. So let's examine the idea of the Shabbat. Why was there a need for a Sabbath? You ever ask that question? Why would Yahweh need for you to have a Shabbat? Well, we've already talked about it. So that you could be fruitful and multiply and replenish and then subdue and have dominion. Let me ask you this. How many Sabbaths have you spent being fruitful and multiplying, replenishing, subduing, and having dominion? Come on, let's just be honest. And so let's go back and look. Let's go back and look at the preceding 6 days of creation. Each one of those are described consistently. Go back and look at it for yourself. Day 1 through 6 is described as, and the evening and the morning were. Day 1 through day 6. But it's interesting. Regarding the Shabbat, that's commonly referred to as the seventh day, we get the word seven from the root of the word sheva, shavua. And so that's in everybody's mind. Well, it's just a seventh day. That makes it sound ordinary. In Genesis 2, it records the seventh day as having no evening or no morning. Every other previous 6 days had an evening and a morning, but not regarding the seventh day. And so the seventh day becomes a day without a genealogy, no beginning or no end. Does that make sense to you? We're not told exactly when it began. And listen to this, just as important, you're not told that the Sabbath has ended. And so the seventh day becomes a different segment of time than the previous days. And as such, without a beginning or an ending, the seventh day actually initiates a Melchizedek order. Why? Because Melchizedek had no genealogy. He had no beginning, and there was no record of his genealogy. And so the Sabbath and the Melchizedek priesthood began their birth together. Does that make sense to you? Listen to me. This is temple language. This is temple construction language that you see back here in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And it's talking about the Sabbath being eternal and the Melchizedek order being eternal, because neither of them have a beginning and an end. And so what's happening here is that this temple language consigns you and I to an eternal priesthood without a beginning or an end. And in fact, if you want to argue this point, I challenge you to go back, because Genesis chapter 2 and verse 3 begins with not only the institution of the Sabbath and the fact that Elohim ceased from his work, But then it begins to talk about how he creates the place to put the man, and he forms man in chapter 2, verse 7, and there's no record of a differentiation between that seventh day and an additional day. So what happens in Genesis chapter 2 is taking place on the Shabbat. Oh, I don't know if I believe this. Wait a minute. I'm putting you in the garden to dress it and to keep it. I'm giving you these commands that you should do them. I'm telling you to be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. So the natural thing for the Adam, as soon as he's given that command, is to step out as the emissary of Yahweh in the garden and to begin to name the animals, to begin to implement what Yahweh had told him to do. And so what happens in Genesis 2 is a Shabbat day. Adam is seen doing the work of Yahweh on the seventh day. It literally, go back and read this. Genesis 2 reveals Adam literally fulfilling the above 5 steps, being fruitful, multiplying, replenishing, subduing, and having dominion. Why? How? Because he's demonstrating proper kingdom management, proper administration of kingdom authority. Anybody that challenges you when you're implementing kingdom authority and instituting kingdom rules in your life on the Sabbath, I would suggest to you, they're the ones attempting to bring chaos and rebellion rather than seeing that the proper order of Yahweh's kingdom is instituted. Sabbath has no beginning, no end. I believe that the Shabbat, and I'm going to explain this because some of you are going to be scratching your head, the Sabbath was intended as an eternal day in which Yahweh could rest from his work. Well, there you go. He rested from his work. Wait a second. You're just looking at work here from a Western mindset. He's actually ceasing from his work of recreation. Why was he recreating things? Because chaos and order had ensued. When he recreates it, there's no chaos and no order. And so to stop chaos from coming back, from rebellion, from starting again, he creates this man and he sticks this man here to operate in his stead. He's ceasing putting down rebellion. Why? Because I have a man who's operating in my image and in my stead. He's subduing and having dominion. I've ceased from that. I need a man who's capable of standing up and taking care of the Father's business. That's the kingdom. That's what listen to me, we're being taught and trained for that now. Like it or not, in the days ahead, you're going to be facing some of the most rebellious entities that the world has ever seen. It's going to be vomited out, and you're going to be challenged with putting down that rebellion. And I've said this for years, the church, if you'll allow me to use that term, the church is not going to leave out of here and step into the millennial kingdom, if you'll allow that term, because I'm going to show you the millennial kingdom has never stopped. We're not going to leave out of here weak and beaten down and frail and timid. We're going to leave out of here. We're not going to leave hair nor hoof behind us. We're going to leave out of here not being frail, not weak, not beaten down. We're going to leave out of here powerful and the force that the rebellious ones must reckon with. I'm telling you. Like the example of the tabernacle here, this is mind-staggering. The Sabbath was both blessed and sanctified. Now, I want to remind you once again, I won't argue with you, the wilderness tent was temporary. We understand that. We've already talked about it. Why? Because it was laid out in the form of this carnal, fleshly man. But the living stones tabernacle, do me a favor, raise your index finger high, turn around and point at your neighbor and tell them you're one of the living stones. This living stones tabernacle is designed to live eternally. And the Sabbath also was designed to last eternally. Now, we don't know how much time ensued from the time of Adam's fall, from the time Adam was created until the fall. But we do know that since the records began there, after the fall of Adam, there's been somewhere around 6,000 years. And if what I'm telling you is the truth, I'm convinced we are still in the Sabbath day. Oh, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I understand that. I'm going to show you why. Can you hold on? Before we get into that, we need to look back at this term blessing. Can y'all hold on? I'm not even halfway through. Can y'all hold on? Let's look at the term for blessing. The reason you need to understand the term for blessing is because it carries with it. I don't just arbitrarily bless you. If you, again, will allow me, I'm standing in the stead of the Creator. I'm just not arbitrarily going to bless you, bless your darling heart. Because, listen to me carefully, blessing comes with condition. That should give you a little shalom, Shepherd John. Because blessing carries the ideal, listen to me, blessing carries the ideal of both relationship and the ability to carry out a specific function that goes with standing in that relationship. And so Yahweh just not going to bless anybody. Are you hearing me? Now the word sanctified implies that I understand now that I have a responsibility because of the relationship that I have with Him. And I also have the responsibility to carry out the function, but now I'm sanctified, and that word sanctifies implies that I have been set aside so that I can carry out the function and the task. I'm not set aside, sanctified, so that I can become pickled and fermented and sit on the shelf and not do anything. Are you hearing me? The Sabbath is set aside and set apart from all the other days in three distinct ways. Number one, Yahweh ceases from His creative work. Number two, it is blessed. Number three, it is sanctified. Again, let's look at the word blessed. It comes from the Hebrew word barak, which means to bless. But you need to remember, listen to me carefully here. As with all the other creation days, what is being blessed is tied to its function. In other words, I'm blessed in order to carry out a specific function. Now, if I don't have the ability to carry out that function, I'm not going to be blessed. If I do have the ability and I refuse to carry out that function, then that doesn't mean Yahweh has to continue to bless me. Does that make sense to you? I'm blessed for a purpose. That's sobering. I'm blessed for a purpose. I'm blessed in order to be fruitful and multiply. In fact, blessing is contingent upon, and it also allows for fruitfulness. In other words, if we believe Yahweh has blessed us, there's no way that I cannot become fruitful. In fact, if you take the word barak, beit, resh, kaf, and then rearrange, you have the letters beit, kaf, resh, you have the Hebrew word bekor. Both blessing and barak and bekor are interwoven. The word bekor means firstborn. Did you hear that? Literally embodied in the word blessing is the word firstborn. And it indicates that if I am blessed, I am literally, as if no one else existed, I am literally the firstborn of Yahweh in the earth. Hallelujah. Some of you ought to get out of your dignified state and put a shout on occasionally, because we're going to find out that we've been blessed for a purpose here. Not just to sit and fat-catted on these pews here, on these benches, and remain in the same condition that we were when we got in here earlier today. I have been blessed for a purpose. Some of you have been blessed for a mess. Come on now. The numeric value of barak is 222. It's an extension of the number 22, which is the Hebrew letters of the alphabet. And if you can think this way, some of you may think that you're out of your mind. Yes, I have been out of my mind for a long time. Romans chapter 12 says, I'm not conformed to the world, I've been transformed because I've had my mind renewed. Some of y'all have had your mind removed. Okay? My mind's being renewed so that I don't think the way that I used to when I was in this fleshly man's mind. I'm trying to change that. And so the Sabbath, this is mind-staggering. The Sabbath becomes the day of begetting. The Sabbath becomes the day of beginning. Today's the day when the Bekurim, the firstborns, should be visible, gathering together. They should begin to be multiplied in the earth. Oh, my goodness. The same numeric value of that word Barak, Bekor, 222, is the value of the Hebrew phrase Vayidaber, and he spoke. When he blessed, he spoke. And when he spoke, these are the words, these are the commands that you should do them. I have so many people that tell me, I hear God. Well, if you hear God, you need to be doing what you said you heard him do. And if you're doing something that's contradicting what's in the Torah, that's not who you didn't hear from the same one that I heard from. You ought to get excited. Sanctified. That used to be I'm not going to almost name the denomination I used to get. Yes. It's called, when you get to a certain level, son, it's called entire sanctification. And you'll be just like us. And I'm thinking I'm finding another place. Because I don't want to be just like that. I want to see some change. I want to see people's lives impacted. I want to see things in the Word that I've not seen. I want the Word's supposed to be alive. And if it's alive, I need to be seeing alive things in it. Now listen to this. This word for sanctified is staggering. It means kadosh or kadash, to declare something holy. And it's not merely by making a declaration. The Hebrew, listen, this is mind-staggering. The Hebrew declares that when something is made kadosh or holy, it indicates a status that is, again, relational to the Creator. In other words, if Yahweh's declared something holy, it is now sanctified and set apart in a divine manner and cannot ever be made common again. Yahweh said the children of Israel were called his. They were declared holy. He told you to be holy as I am holy. If you are holy and if you are kadash, that's sanctified, it literally means you were now in a functional relationship with the Creator. You can never be called common again. The children of Israel became a holy son. The Sabbath was declared kadash, holy, sanctified. And listen to me, it indicates that we belong to him exclusively. I could say it better this way, to the exclusion of all others. We're his. We're now in a relationship with him to where if I stay in that relationship, listen to me, I can make myself common and unclean by stepping outside the relationship. But as long as I stay in that relationship position with him, I can never be made common and unclean again. Now you know why Peter saw the sheet descending with things on it that were typified as being uncommon or unclean, and Yahweh puts it into Peter's mind so that he could understand what he was telling him. Are you hearing me? The children of Israel and the Shabbat, the tabernacle, became the dwelling place of Yahweh. I want you to hear this. Both the Sabbath and Israel are his alone. And as such, now this is where I'm going to make folks mad, because you know that the church has replaced Israel. The church just doesn't know who Israel is. If the church understood that Israel is the term Yisrael, those that stand up right before him, and Yisrael, all the righteous ones, were disseminated throughout the earth, and the church could understand, oh my gosh, pull this mask off, I'm Israel, hello. And if we understand that we are his and his alone, and as such he has empowered us to function both as and in the day and as and in the place where he can rest. You don't understand that. You don't understand that. It's literally, he has created you in his image, and he had all of this rebellion and chaos to put down. And so what he chose to do, you're now standing here, and he steps into you. And as he steps into you, you become his, and he just takes your arm, and now all of a sudden you're doing things in his stead. He ceased from his work. You're now doing his work. He's resting in you while you're doing you're the mechanism that he's using in the earth to accomplish the order and the structure and the kingdom mandate that he's instituted in the earth. Hallelujah. He needs you so that he can rest. Oh, he's tired. Doddering old gentleman sitting on the throne. Aged one, ancient one needs just to sit down and take a break. No, that's not what the rest that's the Sabbath entails us talking about. And let me just remind you, because the Sabbath day is based on relationship and Yahweh is the only one that can sanctify it, then I'm telling you that there's absolutely no way that anybody could call another day the Shabbat, or another entity or a nation his in their place. Replacement theology inculcates an irreverent notion. In other words, they have the audacity to think that man has the ability to declare something holy and sanctified. The only way I can make something sanctified is because it might be in a relationship with me, and it definitely is not going to be holy because of a relationship with me. The only way I can be sanctified or holy is because of my relationship with Yahweh. And so if the Catholic Church or any other entity has the audacity to say we're going to worship on this day, you can worship any day of the week. I'm not saying that, but it doesn't make it the Shabbat. Are you hearing me? No entity has the ability to make something holy and sanctified and a relationship with Yahweh. So what makes the Shabbat unique? Well, most of you would quickly answer. I have it right here in case this is going to be an open book test. Because Yahweh said so. It's holy and sanctified because he said so. And it stays holy and sanctified, and I can just celebrate the Sabbath, and I don't have to do anything that requires me to be holy and sanctified. And so if I'm unholy and unclean and I'm over here on the Sabbath day, did I just make the Sabbath unclean and common? Are you hearing what I'm trying to say? That's why we need to rethink some of these things. There has to be a reason that Yahweh used to justify calling the Sabbath day the day of rest. Listen to this. Are y'all getting any of it, by the way? Genesis 2, verse 2. And on the seventh day, Elohim ended. Sometime if we get a chance, I'm sure Shepherd John will do this teaching, because it talks about Elohim throughout the creation and recreation account rather than Yahweh. You need to ask, why did he choose, why is the terminology Elohim versus Yahweh used? That's a good teaching for you. Maybe Wednesday night school. Elohim ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. Look at that word, ended. It's the Hebrew word kala. And it means to cease, to accomplish something. In other words, he set the Sabbath day aside because he had accomplished his work to bring a specific work to end. And it's not an accident that this word kala is the same Hebrew word as the word for bride, kala. Let me ask you this. Has the bride of Elohim ceased to exist? No. Perhaps there was something else intended here when it was translated into the King James English. And maybe it was hidden here in order to propagate a different agenda than what Yahweh intended. Now let me go back. If you recall, early on we established that the recreation account, Genesis chapter 1 all the way up to Genesis chapter 2, it came about as a means to reestablish divine order out of what was waste and desolate after that rebellion. Now, if that was the case, that it was seen in order to cease work and bring it to an end, that something would have to justify the sanctification and the holy estate of the Sabbath as the day that the work ended. Does that make sense? Let me read it for you again. If the Sabbath was instituted after the rebellion, it would seem that something had to cease work, had to cease and be brought to its end in order to justify setting apart the seventh day and sanctifying it and making it holy, right? because that's the day that seemingly work ended. And so I set it apart. Why? Because the work ended. Okay? And so let me ask you this. Was it Yahweh's work in general that ended? Or was it a specific labor that had ended and not the entirety of his work? It doesn't take a rocket science to understand that if it was the entirety of his work that had ended, poof, you're no longer here. Nothing exists. Are you listening to me? And even science acknowledges today that our universe is continually expanding. And when Yahweh says, let there be, light continues. Light never ceases moving. And so if he had ceased creating, light would have ceased. Are you listening to me? So what could this have been that ceased, and how does it relate to the prohibition of work on the Sabbath here in our Parsha? Well, the Septuagint, you see it LXX, offers the Greek word for kala, synteleo, ended. And if you examine each of those words, the word kala and this Greek word synteleo, the central idea of both those two words is not the end of all activity. Rather, it's the conclusion of a specific intent. I came here today with a specific intent of sharing this word with you. If my work cease, then I will just fall back here and lay down and rest for the rest of the day. That's the mindset of creating the Sabbath. I do nothing else. But I am ceasing this specific intent in about another 3 hours delivering this word. And after that, I will help put up the sound equipment. I will get my family taken care of. We will go home, and we will still continue to do something until the sundown this evening. Does that make sense to you? Not all of my work ceased, but just what I had a specific intent for. And in our present case, the specific intent of work that had ceased was in relation to the former 6 days. And what was the purpose of the former 6 days of recreation? To reestablish order out of chaos. And then as soon as order is established out of chaos, man was given the above blessing mandate as it related to those previous 6 days, and he was empowered to accomplish the kingdom principles on the Sabbath day. He was empowered to do that. Why would I be empowered to do something if I'm not supposed to work? Well, then I need to find out what work really is. Again, the Western mindset. We need to go back and look at what really constitutes. You turned the light on, Miss Jean. You broke the Sabbath. Being facetious here. Let me ask you this. Yahweh ceased from his work. There's nothing in chapter 2 to tell us that the Sabbath ended in the formation of man's body. Now, Yahweh's specific. If Yahweh had wanted you to know that he never did anything else after the chapter 2, verse 2 or 3, then he would have said, listen, verse 4, and the 8th day began, and I created new beginnings. I created the Adam and formed his body. But it doesn't tell you that. Elohim worked by creating the Adam and forming his body. Are you hearing me? The answer lies in understanding the intent of Elohim and his purpose of restoring chaos out of, restoring order out of chaos, and to launch a new period, a day called the Shabbat, wherein no chaos or rebellion could exist, called the Sabbath. And what he intended for the Sabbath came to fulfillment and completion, and now they, man and the Sabbath, together begin a new period of holiness reflected in a temple tabernacle type setting. They became the image of an eternal dwelling place wherein Elohim would be worshiped in an orderly, structured fashion without chaos and rebellion. Let me remind you of the immortal words of our Messiah on the execution stake. It is synteleo. It is kala. That word for finish there is teleho, and it comes from the same root as that word synteleo. And I have to ask you this then. If Yahweh's work ended on the Sabbath day, based on our understanding of that word kala or synteleo in the Greek Septuagint, then if Yeshua says his work was finished, brought to an end, and he never did anything else, was it a specific work that took place on the execution stake that ended while his eternal work would continue, or did all of his work end there? See, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this stuff out. You just got to go back and say, I was fed a line of stuff, and I need to go back and rethink some of this. I don't know if I believe you yet. Let me just give you another verse. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 8. For finding fault with them, Yahweh speaking, he saith, behold, the days come, saith Yahweh. That's just in case you think that I was attributing that to someone else. Jeremiah chapter 31 reiterates this. The days come, saith Yahweh, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Isn't it interesting? That phrase, I will make, is that same Greek word synteleo. And so I have to ask you a question. Did the first covenant end, or was the purpose for it or its intent brought to a completion? Are you hearing me? Are you seeing the direction I'm going with this? You need to understand these things, because Yahweh's covenant did not end. In fact, the only thing that changed was that he would, instead of writing it on tablets of stone, Jeremiah 31, I believe, says that he's going to write it in the fleshly tablets of your heart. The covenant didn't change. It was just that the intent for that time changed, ended. See, it's not hard to see this. Let me throw this out. Psalm 90, verse 4. I don't know if I'm going to get through. 2 Peter 3:8. Both declare, two witnesses certifying the truth. 1,000 years is as a day. And so if we seven the Sabbath, which has no beginning or end, is it possible that maybe we're looking at a prophetic timetable regarding the tenure of man as the image of Elohim in the earth? Let me share this. You and I have been taught, go back in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, we've been taught that man's days are numbered at 120 years, right? And we've said we'll multiply 120 times 50, a Jubilee season, and give us 6,000 years. 6,000 years for man to reign in the earth in this fleshly condition. But what if we've been missing the prophetic message of the Sabbath, and that what he's actually telling us, since the Sabbath is eternal and doesn't end, you think the prophetic message of the Sabbath would be that there's going to be a spiritual man that would rule the earth as the image or in the image of Elohim for eternity, rather than just 6,000 years. Suppose, listen to me carefully, because we've been talking about the creation and recreation account of day 1 through 6. A day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as a day. Suppose those 6,000 years leading us into what everybody's anticipating as the seventh or Sabbath millennium. Suppose those 6,000 years are a dress rehearsal of the first 6 days of creation, when the chaos and rebellion is about to be put down. At the end of this 6,000 years, there's a Shabbat day, and there's going to be an Adam, a tabernacle fit for the dwelling place of Yahweh, raised up in his image, who will make sure that there's no rebellion and no chaos. Are you listening to what I'm trying to tell you? The last Adam and the living stones tabernacle are once again redefined in the Sabbath day. You were blessed, and you were sanctified for the Sabbath day. And you have a function. What's your function? Conjunction, junction. Are you listening? Let me ask you this. If that's the case, is there not going to be any work done during the Sabbath millennium that everybody commonly calls the Sabbath millennium? Well, if I'm not mistaken, we're told that Yeshua will rule the nations with a rod of iron throughout the 7th millennium. Wait a minute. Ruling with a rod of iron means he's going to subdue and have dominion. So based on our inculcation from the Western mindset of work. It looks like he's going to be working. But is he doing work that was wrong on the Sabbath? Because if you're subduing and exercising dominion over chaos and rebellion, and you're doing everything you can to make sure that you're fruitful and multiplying and replenishing, that you're walking in the earth as the image of Yahweh on the Sabbath, and I submit to you, it just looks at how work is defined. Are y'all getting any of this? Well, I'm so confused. I'm so confused. From our evidence, we got to conclude, if the Sabbath is indeed eternal and hasn't ended, then I submit once again that the Shabbat simultaneously launched the Melchizedek order. After an eternal season wherein Adam would rule as a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, following the pattern of Messiah, and that Adam, like Messiah, was intended to be high priest forever and rule under that same Melchizedek order. The Melchizedek order, what do you think the purpose of the Melchizedek order? It goes back to keeping structure and subduing rebellion, keeping rebellion underfoot, exercising dominion. If this Melchizedek order or this Melchizedek rule, like the Sabbath, exhibited no beginning or no end, no genealogy, then I submit to you, go back and argue with me, but bring a valid argument. I submit to you that neither one has ceased. Now, your argument would be that the Melchizedek priesthood was superseded by the Levitical priesthood or the Aaronic priestly system. But that argument could not work since the former, the Melchizedek order, was implemented to function in a holy environment where chaos and rebellion could not rule. In other words, what we commonly refer to as the law of spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua. Are you hearing that? While the latter, the Levitical priesthood, was instituted to function where carnal men were subjected to the law of sin and death. And it would function until such time as the redemptive or recreative work of Yeshua would once again allow man to walk, not after the flesh. Go back and read Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 7, Paul talks about the condemnation. He says, oh, I'm a wretched man. Someone deliver me from this body of death. That's what that tabernacle temple system was. It was a body of death. And then he goes into Romans chapter 8, verse 1. There is therefore now no condemnation to those that walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua made me free from the law of sin and death. In other words, he instituted once again the Melchizedek order. Why? Because one came in a sinless condition who was able to administer the kingdom principles. As long as there was no one to administer kingdom principles, the Levitical order had its purpose. Yet death still worked in it. And rebellion and chaos still had its way in the earth. Are you seeing the pattern here? My goodness. That's exciting to me. So, can I ask you this question? I keep picking on Miss Jean. This time I'll ask Tim. Do you think that the law of the Spirit of life would determine what kind of work we could do on the Shabbat? Don't answer that. Because unless you want to come up and get the note. It would seem to me that both the Sabbath and the Melchizedek order are predicated on the blessing and sanctified declared in Genesis chapter 2. Would you agree? And also that man, who is the image of Elohim, should engage himself in administering the law of the Spirit of life, much like Yahweh himself, Elohim himself. Elohim administered the law of the Spirit of life. And yet he disengaged him after the 6 days of restoring creation. He disengaged himself from that, from establishing that again, and allowed the Adam to step in there and become the one that would implement it. Yet Elohim continued to maintain his rule over and his participation in his completed work. Can y'all see it? Let me go back. I'll start at the beginning. Did y'all get any of that? It's my opinion that both the Sabbath, or neither the Sabbath or the Melchizedek order, was ever superseded by any means. Eden was the idyllic place for the intent of Elohim and his man Adam to manifest. This order that was established at the end of the Shabbat was interrupted once again until the coming of a last Adam. Listen to me careful. Because the last Adam, when he came, he opened up the door through the Melchizedek priesthood that would enable us to return to an eternal Sabbath found only in Eden. And you and I are going to return to Eden again. This is the truth. If you go back and look at, everybody's talking about, we got to make teshuvah, and we look at it as making a return. But if you look at the root of it, it's the root of Shabbat. You're going to return to the Shabbat in Eden. Why? Because it is a holy, sanctified place, and it's the place where blessing resides, and it's the place that Yahweh created you to stand in his place as his image in the earth. And so both the Sabbath and the Melchizedek order, listen to me carefully, they have both always existed, never been superseded. They have always existed in their pure, holy, and sanctified forms, ever waiting for those who would walk, not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. If there had been a man capable of walking in the earth after the Spirit from the fall of Adam forward, you would have never seen the Levitical priesthood. Israel was brought to Mount Sinai and given the opportunity to walk, not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. But they chose, by implementing their worship with that of the golden calf, they chose to allow the law of sin and death to again operate in them. So order was abrogated, chaos began to rule, and so Yahweh had to put it off until such time as a man would come who had no sin in him, and that man would then reinstitute, if you will, reinvigorate, if you will, the image of Yahweh in the earth, allowing you and I to stand in the stead of Yahweh, knowing that we are not condemned anymore by the law of sin and death. We have been set free. We can walk according to the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua. We have the ability to stand as Yahweh's image in the earth, and the Sabbath was created for us to demonstrate that. And listen to me, it's not just a one-day week. The Sabbath was a day established that has never ended, so you should be doing it all week long. But it should culminate, it should be impregnated in you, and you should birth it out on the Shabbat. Hallelujah. Yeshua and he alone could properly administer the Sabbath and the Melchizedek order. Remember, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Look at these words, made and man. In the Greek language, the word made is genomichi, and it means to come into being, to pass, to be ordained. Listen to this. But it also can indicate to be married. The root of that in the Septuagint is related to the Hebrew word hayah, which means to be, to exist forever. It comes from the root hava, which means to breathe, to exist from the breath of the Creator. And it's seen, that word haya or hava is seen throughout the recreation account and the Chronicles of Eden there as well. The word for man in the Greek language, anthropos, and it's related to the Hebrew word Adam. And so it's my opinion that the Sabbath, listen to me, this blew my mind. I'm taking dictation. When Yahweh's given me this, and I'm taking this dictation. If I could take credit for this, I would be out selling this tomorrow. Are you hearing me? Without his anointing, I'm as dumb as a busted rock. This is dictation from the Ruach HaKodesh. The Sabbath was breathed out of the Creator as the vehicle for the ordination or implementation of the marriage of Adam and Eve, who together would function as priests after the order of Melchizedek. In functioning after that order, they would be charged with dispensing the government of the kingdom. In other words, if I'm going to properly dispense the government, I have to be fruitful and multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. That means I'm ensuring that no rebellion and no chaos would arise again as long as I'm standing here in the image of Yahweh. And that's what you need to do. You need to draw a line in the sand. I'm created in the image of Yahweh. No, there's no room for rebellion or chaos here. Listen to me. All my children better listen, because there ain't no room for it in my house. Hello. Got some children probably listening online. That's why you ain't in the house. I'm just playing. You're coming home. After the fall, neither the Sabbath nor the Melchizedek order were done away with. Listen to me carefully here. Listen to me carefully. They were neither done away with. However, both the Sabbath and the Melchizedek priesthood did lack a man. They both needed a man to officiate and conduct the affairs of the kingdom. No man was sinless. And so as a result, Yahweh had to implement a wilderness tabernacle and Levitical system until one would arrive on the scene, Yeshua, who would thereby reaffirm the Sabbath and Melchizedek order and once again establish a means whereby the sons of man, that's talking about you, could rightfully superintend the kingdom through the Sabbath and mediate the covenant of Yeshua's blood through the Melchizedek order. You cannot mediate the blood of the Messiah through the Levitical order. You cannot. You cannot. They will not function together. Oh, I don't know if I believe that. I'm glad you said that. It would seem consistent with the work of Yeshua that was shown on the Sabbath. Remember, the fourth commandment states, Exodus 20, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, the way that we look at that word for remembers, we recall something that happened in the past. But the word for remember there, translated as mark for memorial, is also the Hebrew word, or a Hebrew word for a man, in particular a circumcised man. And so the Shabbat is a day when a circumcision has to take place. In other words, I cannot truly celebrate, sanctify, keep a Sabbath day holy, function in the image of Yahweh if I have not circumcised this carnal, fleshly nature. And so if I want to remember the Shabbat day to keep it holy, then I need to walk according to the law of the Spirit of life in Yeshua, our Messiah, and not according to the carnal laws of sin and death. I am a circumcised man in the heart. Say amen. If you go back and read Exodus 20, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, it's immediately followed by a reference to the 6 days of creation. Immediately. Putting emphasis to what I've been telling you. 6 days we shalt you labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to Elohim. In it shall you not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your maidservant, manservant, your cattle, nor your stranger that's sent within your gates. Once again, we have a conundrum. I'm told that I'm supposed to be part of the Sabbath, be in His image, but now I'm told that I can't, not only can I not work, but nothing in my house. Does it sound like I'm preaching a contradictory message? Does this mean that all work is prohibited? Again, that word for holy, kadash, indicates to consecrate. Listen to me. If y'all ain't up out of your seats, we're going to go for another half hour. When I finish this, if you ain't up out of your seat, listen to this. Kadash, it means to consecrate, to sanctify, prepare, to dedicate, to treat as sacred. But the Greek word that's used for it, hagiadzo, means to render, to separate profane things, to cleanse something externally, to purify it ceremonially, to purify by expiation, to render compensation to one who's owed something, to indemnify an individual. In other words, I am compensating them for a loss, damage, or injury, to recompense, to redress, to make amends, or to make a repayment. You just missed that. Just hold on. The Sabbath and the Melchizedek order were to be administered by the man in his image, and you sanctify the seventh day when you redress or correct any wrong, injury, damage, loss, or anything else sustained by those that walk according to the law of the Spirit of life at the hands of the rebellious ones who are attempting to bring chaos to Yahweh's kingdom. You have a moral, legal, lawful Torah obligation to address every wrong, every injury, every hurt that has been received by an individual who is walking according to the law of the Spirit of life. You have a right to call the enemy out for being caught in theft. You have the right to address sin, sickness, death, and disease on the Shabbat. That's why Yeshua could heal on the Sabbath. That's why Yeshua said, don't you understand that it's lawful to do good on the Shabbat? If my neighbor is physically challenged and my neighbor has no other opportunity to cut his grass but on a Sabbath day, and I see my neighbor struggling out there on the Sabbath day to cut his grass, I am doing good if I go over there and I help my neighbor finish what he's doing to ensure that he doesn't injure himself. It's no different than if my neighbor's ass was in a ditch and I say, oh, look at that ass in that ditch. I'll leave him there until Sunday. That ass or that ox in the ditch, listen to me, he wasn't going to die while he's in that ditch, but yet we're told it's lawful for me to go and get the ox out. The Pharisees would rather you deal with that ox in that ditch than you would a man who'd fallen by the wayside and a Samaritan had to come and take care of him. You need to get these things in their proper context. Say amen right there. Oh, me, you can. I'll preach myself happy. You can see this in Luke chapter 4, 18. You need to, for the sake of argument, you need to go back and read Isaiah 61, which is where Luke 4:18 is taken from. I'm just going to read you a little bit of it. The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me. This is Yeshua speaking. Because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel. I believe this would have been on a Shabbat. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of Yahweh. This is the work that should be done on Shabbat. But what about Exodus 35, verse 2? 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day there shall be to you a holy day, a Shabbat of rest. Whoever does work therein shall be put to death. So I need to know these things because the Pharisees in the group might decide to kill me. Any work that exalts the flesh, the carnal man, and normal eating is not exalting the flesh. Notice I clarified that, normal eating. Anything that exalts the flesh, which is emblematic of the Genesis 3 rebellion and counterproductive to the intent of the Sabbath rest, brings one back under the law of sin and death, and that's what Moshe's talking about. When it talks about 6 days work being done, but on the seventh day you rest, anybody that does anything contrary to the Sabbath day work that was required on the Sabbath goes back under the law of sin and death, and that's the individual that's going to die. That's what he's alluding to. I don't know if I believe you. Context is the principal rule in interpreting Scripture. I've got 5 or 6 slides if you can hold on. The last several chapters of Exodus and the preceding ones of Exodus all deal with building the tabernacle. There's a transition that occurs after the golden calf incident, which was a pattern of the fleshly man. This event, go back and read it, go back and put it in its proper context. Exodus 35, 1 through 3 is not in chronological order. This occurs after Moshe brings Yahweh's instructions down the mountain and before work starts on the tabernacle. And so what's being told the children of Israel is all tabernacle work. See, they're being told, let's build this tabernacle, get all the stuff. Here's the materials. He said, wait. We're not going to work on the tabernacle on the Shabbat. Why? Because the tabernacle represented this carnal fleshly man. I will do nothing that exalts this carnal fleshly man on the Shabbat. But yet the Levites could function in their place inside the tabernacle on the Sabbath. Anything that would exalt Yahweh or lead to worship of Yahweh could be venerated on the Shabbat. Can you see the difference between the two? That priestly system was full of death, bloodshed, and death and rebellion can't be tolerated on the Sabbath. In addition, one of the most infamous of all Sabbath prohibitions, and you can see it, I could give you some stories, is kindling a fire on Shabbat. And that's followed right here. You see this in this particular verse. But if you understand that it's actually a euphemistic term that has to do with gendering strife in one's home, then you know that's the kind of fire you're not supposed to be building. Come on now. Matthew chapter 12, verse 1 through 12, Yeshua examines this very topic, and he says it's lawful to do well on the Shabbat. And I'm going to be making people mad, but I'll just look you straight in the eye and tell you I don't care. For us today, stopping to purchase a meal to feed my children is not breaking Shabbat. If I can pull an animal out of a pit on the Sabbath day, then why can't I feed and warm my children? If the Levitical system allowed the priest, verse 5, go back and look, to profane the Sabbath, verse 5 of Matthew 12, according to rabbinic law, by taking care of the necessary obligations to the tabernacle man, they were just taking care of the natural obligations, the necessary things to take care of the fleshly carnal man. If they could take care of the necessary things for that fleshly carnal man, why can't I take care of the necessary things for this fleshly carnal man? It represented our fleshly body, and we are a kingdom of priests after an even higher order. Then why would we suffer the bondage of a former system to enslave us to a dead work? The Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. That word Lord there is Kyros. And it's translated, listen to this, we're getting ready to close. I've got a couple more if y'all can hold on. Give me 3 minutes. It means having the power to decide, the possessor, the sovereign one. It hints at one who possesses the power to determine what is suitable to the Sabbath and of releasing him and others from its obligations. Did you hear that? That's why Yeshua made the Pharisees and the religious ones of his day insane. They had so many fences built around the true heart's intent of the Shabbat that you could not worship Yahweh properly, and Yeshua was the possessor of the Sabbath. He had the right to restore it to its proper intent and to release you from the obligations to a dead work so that you could exemplify Yahweh in the earth and carry out the necessary functions to release people from captivity. This is what those that were created in His image were first charged with doing with the creation of the Sabbath. This is why the law of the Spirit of life has made me free from the law of sin and death. I am no longer obligated to it. I have been released and set free. And in conclusion, one more thing to add to it. When you want to look about the eternal temple or tabernacle that's going to be built, there's only one prophet that spoke towards it at length, and that was Ezekiel. And his prophetic writings reveal the living stone's tabernacle as the temple of Yahweh. And it's interesting because it says that the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, right? And people will say, well, that's talking specifically about Yeshua. But Ezekiel is referred to as the Son of Man over 90 times in an allegorical perspective regarding the coming institution of the living stone's tabernacle and the restoration of the tabernacle man who will be built out of the outcasts of Israel, and you will collectively serve in His image in the capacity of Son of Man, and you're going to reveal the image of Yahweh in the earth, and you will once again be fruitful, multiply, you will replenish, and you will exercise dominion in His stead one last time. I am crucified with Messiah. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but as Messiah lives in me. And the life I live now in this flesh, I live by faith in the Son of Yahweh, who loved me and he gave himself for me. Shabbat shalom. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.